Welcome to the
Hi,
House of
Aditi.
Talks. I
Hi.
was
Can you hear me okay?
absolutely, absolutely.
Good.
So,
Good.
welcome to Dr. A Talks. I'm so glad you found
Thanks.
the time to be on this chat because I'm looking forward to our conversation. Lisa,
Me
I'm going to
too.
start the chat by reading a poem which I think is just so beautiful. Yeah. So
Oh,
just
okay.
indulge me for 2 minutes.
Absolutely. I'm all about poetry. So, yes, please go ahead.
Super. Is there a way to talk of the sun without invoking the moon? Love without loss, desire without despair, without hope, arrival without departure. What follows can't be easily ignored. If life is an act of remembrance, don't forget every considered step and how well you have fallen down. I mean, this pretty much is the gist of life, right? It's a way to
Yeah.
live life. It's to become aware of how one should live their life. You know, you're a mixed bag of many things. You're gorgeous, you've got a great body, you're a fantastic actor, and there's such a depth to who you are as a person, more than anything. I mean, your words, your poetry, your book shows it all. When did you discover the writer part of you? I do know that you were always keen on becoming a writer, even as a child. However, when
Yeah.
did that actually manifest externally?
Well, that's a great question, Aditi. But first of all, I want to say it's so good to see you. You know, it's fantastic connecting during this strange season that we're living through. And you know, I really appreciated what you said. You were talking about the fact that the monsoon rains have started behind you, and I'm sitting in Singapore, so you know that actually makes me a little nostalgic and brings me a little bit closer to Bombay as well. Well, you know, I think that you and I kind of obviously share a very long, I would say, colorful history in the business that we're associated with, right? And in the same way that I think you have a very distinct career and identity aside from model, actress, you know, celebrity. In the same way, I like to think that I've always been a covert writer, you know. I think that I grew up an only child and quite quiet, actually, a complete introvert, you might say. And part of being an only child and also part of being flung into Bombay in the early 90s, sort of almost accidentally, was really becoming an observer. I'm a great witness. I'm actually the person at the party who's sitting on the side, trying to sit on the side or in the corner and watching. And I've always had that aspect of the observer in me. And, you know, I didn't necessarily understand it, but I used to keep a lot of diaries ever since I was 16.
Okay.
And they were not diaries that were like, dear diary, here's what happened today. I ate this and then I went and I met this person. It wasn't like that. It was a lot more of impressions and moments and little snatches of conversation that I would hear that would just stay in my mind. And I used to write them down. And I sort of knew that they were forming the spine of something, a book one day. But, you know, I didn't have the confidence to write a book when I was younger. And that I also think that what ends up happening when you are successful in front of the camera, particularly in India, we tend to get boxed in and labeled, right? And you tend to, we're still living in a society, and I will say in a patriarchal society, where particularly as a woman, the way that you look often overshadows whatever other skills and attributes you might have. And it works both ways. If people perceive you to be pretty, then naturally that defines everything. Then, you know, oh, well, that's okay. You know, she doesn't really need to do anything else, right? And conversely as well, if you are perceived to be in some way flawed, then people will also kind of rationalize that in some way. Yeah, but she's smart, so it's okay. It's very strange and it's very unhealthy. And so I always had all these questions as I moved through my life. And I always knew that I would write a book. I'm a late bloomer, though, obviously, because I only got around to writing my book in my 40s. But the great thing is I have a lot of material to write about.
Absolutely.
And to be honest, given a chance, I would not have started with a memoir. I would have started with a novel because I love fiction and I have so many stories.
So
There's
you have a book deal for 3 books, right? So is that the
yeah.
next book? Is it going to be a fiction? Is it going to be something that is,
I can't reveal it yet. I will get around to writing a fiction
Okay.
book, though. I will get around to writing a fiction book. Maybe the book in between will sort of be a mixture. It'll be sort of an observational, fictional, meta something.
Okay. Looking
I don't
forward
know.
to
It's very hard to talk about it all when you're in process. But yeah, so I always wanted to be a writer. And I'm finally basically fulfilling my greatest aspiration, my greatest purpose. I really do feel that it's also my purpose in life. And everything has set me up for this. I'm grateful for all the opportunities I've been given before this. But there's a part of me that's always felt just a bit uncomfortable. It's almost like I'm playing a role. Whereas as a writer, I feel completely that I embody that idea of being a writer, that's the identity that I feel most comfortable with.
Okay. So when you came to Mumbai, and obviously both of us are the Glad Rags products, and we've done many
That's right.
for them. So what I went through at that time was I was already studying to be a doctor, and here I was posing in a swimsuit. So
yeah.
For me, it was almost like an out-of-body experience to look at the cover and like, is it really me who's doing this? I couldn't relate to that, and people started identifying with that persona of the woman who was projected on the magazines to say, oh, she's hot, or oh, she's sexy, and I could not. It took me years to kind of get that in my mind to say, okay, this is what the externality of me is, and that's how I'm being perceived. Because till then, I was always perceived as somebody who stood first in the class, or who got admission in medical college, and so on and so forth. So did you go through, because you have mentioned quite a few times that you were not comfortable many times in your own skin, right?
Yes.
So was your journey similar, or was it any different? And if so, how was it, and what was it?
I love that you brought that up, Aditi, and I think that again, this is probably a place where we've had parallel experiences and we've never even had a chance to really talk about this, but there's so much to unpack there. Absolutely. I mean, working as a model, basically, I mean, these images are illusionary, right? They're not real. There's an entire coterie of people that's creating this, and very often the end result doesn't resemble you at all, because it's a combination of the makeup and the lighting and the photography, and today airbrushing, which we didn't have when we started way back in the 90s, so it still somewhat resembled us. And it does tend to, I mean, there is a strange fracturing I found, exactly what you're saying, that there was the me, and there was the image, and then there was the me. And I was struggling for a long time, like, where do they even fit together? I can't find a way to fit them, and I'll tell you one very quick story that I think really exemplifies how disjointed I was for a while, particularly in the 90s. And also, I must add, when you're a young woman and you don't know yourself really well yet, and you're just trying to figure out who you are and try to find your voice, it becomes even more harrowing, I would say. Because here you have people telling you who you are without you discovering who you are. People are like, this is who you are, and I'm going to put you in this box. And it's very disheartening, But I still remember very clearly what I used to do in the 90s, because we could get away with it. There was no paparazzi, there was no social media. Nobody was looking at your airport looks or anything like that.
Absolutely.
I mean, of course, we had these glamorous images, but aside from that, we were leading our lives and, and going about our lives. And I used to, maybe out of a sense of trying to gain back control, I used to go to the opposite extreme. When I wasn't appearing from the camera, I used to not even brush my hair. I was and I used to wear these really raggedy, shapeless clothes with holes in them. And then without the makeup, I looked very, very different, because I did transform, and the makeup was also very heavy, let's face it, also in the 90s.
So
you remember the cutting we used to do, the cutting and the cryolin and everything?
Oh my God, yes.
But anyway, so here's the story. So I still remember I was sitting at a 5-star hotel, and there's these two boys sitting next to me, and you can hear what they're talking about. And I could tell that they're kind of like looking over at me and checking me out and looking me up and down. And one of them sort of nudges the other and he says, "Hey, check her out, huh? Not bad." And so this guy looks me up and down, and he goes, "She's okay, but she's no Lisa Ray." And that was such a surreal moment, because I realized that the image of me, or me, I could never even live up to the actual image of me. Lisa Ray, so-called Lisa Ray, is actually sitting here, and I'm not good enough because you still have an image of me that is so far from reality. And I feel that really illustrates also kind of the strange perceptions that we create around celebrities and images and things like that. Slowly, I think maybe today we're starting to break it down a little bit, but I do find still that young girls are still very vulnerable to the images that they see on social media. And today, Aditi, of course, and this is something that you can actually speak to in terms of also mental health. Today we're seeing such unrealistic images, right? Everyone has a filter. Everyone can, airbrush themselves. I mean, where does it stop? Where's the reality?
Yeah, absolutely. I think.
Did you feel that? I mean, I'm honestly really curious. Like, do you feel that today that's a problem?
Oh yeah. I mean, don't get me started. I can speak for hours on the reality and the real life that we are leading, and it's not limited to celebrities anymore. It's pretty much, it applies to everybody who is living their lives on social media, right?
Yeah.
It is just, and everybody needs to realize that that's not the truth. You need to find your truth. So I came to a point where it merged. At some point, the image that was projected or created of me by, say, the photographers or the filmmakers or people, whoever, and me as a person, that merged. But it took time for me, and I had to work on it to kind of absorb it. And when that happened is when I realized I am just so comfortable in my skin. I don't really care. And like you, I've had that, you look like Aditi. Are you Aditi Govitrikar by any chance? So I just smile and I leave it at that. I don't even bother to respond. I'm like, you decide, am I Aditi Govitrikar or am I not? It's okay. It doesn't matter to me anymore. So it took a lot of work for me to get to that level where I became very comfortable in who I was. So whether it was, my persona as a doctor, or now as a counselor or a psychologist, and as an actor, because I still continue to act and walk the ramp. I'm very little now, of course. So what in you brought that amalgamation?
That's a great question. And I'm so glad you shared that, because again, I think it's so interesting that this is some place that we have had these very similar or mirrored journeys. It took me a long time. And the real kind of breakthroughs, first of all, happened when I worked on myself, when I understood, first I had to address whatever pain and trauma I was holding on to that made me very defensive. And then to go deeper, to understand who I am, to find my voice, to feel very comfortable in my skin, to own myself and my stories and who I was, and to love all of it, including the flaws. And that's I would say that's honestly an ongoing process. It's still going on. But I've come a long way. I know that. And I often say that, it actually, as soon as I turned 40, something happened. I don't know what it was, things there was a big shift. And of course I was working on myself, and through a bunch of things, there was a lot of working on my good mental hygiene, psychologically, and then emotionally letting go of old traumas and addressing that. And then spiritually as well, I developed a very strong spiritual practice that gave me like a framework from which to see myself and perceive myself, and my belief system. That was very, very important. And today I feel so strong in myself that it's almost like no matter what you tell me, even if you, because I think we're all, as women, brought up to be people pleasers as well. Also, if you don't like me, then it's my fault. It's not your
Yeah.
fault. And
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
today it's the other way around. I'm sorry, you know, take me as I am. If you don't like me, it's honestly, it's not my problem, you know,
Yeah.
and I'm cool
Yeah.
with that as well. I'm okay
Yeah.
with that. So that it was also a lot of working on myself, you know, in all of these dimensions.
Right.
But also the 40s, the cool thing about the 40s was, aside from that, also there was this weird lightness that happened. Like I also stopped taking myself so seriously. I stopped taking life so seriously. Now that also,
I
of
think
course,
what must have happened from what you're saying is you must have started taking the real life a little more lightly. Not you as yourself as a person, because I don't see that in you who takes yourself kind of lightly. It's the real life which we used to take oh so personally. Right?
I think it's, you know, it's also the little things that normally we get hung up on, like validation and people's opinions and what do I look like and and all, you know, it adds up in a day. It's a lot of stuff. That's what I mean by I let go of that. So there was a lightness. There was a lightness. And yeah, when I say I don't take myself so seriously, I think it's just seeing things with a light touch, with a little bit more humor, like being able to laugh at myself. So even when I get these, you know, I do a practice also, Aditi. I've been doing this very interesting practice that I've been talking about. It's called Ho'oponopono. It's a fun word. It's a Hawaiian practice.
Hawaiian practice, yes.
And you may have heard of this, right? So it's where you use these kinds of affirmations, right? I'm sorry, please forgive me, I love you, thank you. And I use that with my own thoughts. So normally, we are our own biggest critics. You know, forget walking into a room of, you know, other people who you think are going to judge you. I actually say to myself, and someone taught me this, for instance, if I'm giving a talk or I have to make a public appearance or things like that, I have not gotten over my fear of public speaking, or, you know, the introvert is still very well alive in me. But what I say to myself is, I actually say to myself, I give you permission to judge me. Because you will never judge me as much as I judge myself. And let me love the thoughts. You know, if judgmental thoughts come up, if jealousy comes up, if anger comes up, I actually give it love. As opposed to what we've been taught also in a strange way by society, is that, you know, there are certain good thoughts, there are bad thoughts, and they have different boxes. And so if it's a bad thought, you must somehow suppress it, you must get rid of it. You must not accept it. And again, that's what I mean about accepting the wholeness of who I am. I accept that I'm a human being. And, you know, I'll have so-called useful thoughts. I'll have not so useful thoughts. But I accept the whole package. It's just that I don't get attached to the unuseful thoughts, and I give them love, but I don't let them take control over me. So that's transformed my experience of just about everything. Not just other people's opinions, and not just how I feel in my skin, but how I feel in my skin is also the result of accepting the whole package and just loving it.
Absolutely, the good, bad, ugly, which are the labels that we give, right?
It's just the labels that we give.
There is only purity in us. It's how we label, and that's pretty much what takes you down. Now, is part of this whole journey being the nudge that the big C, or the cancer that you went through, which was an extremely traumatic experience, as I can imagine, was that the nudge that, you know, that played the fulcrum or the catalyst in letting you become who you are today?
I would say not just nudge, maybe it was the consolidator. Because I had been, you know, sometimes there's a perception that you've gone through this big experience, and as a result of that, you've gone searching for greater meaning in your life. But I was actually searching for meaning before cancer. And it just so happens, I honestly also attribute maybe my attitude and my will and the way that I was able to navigate a very difficult health crisis to my practices. So, you know, they say that you don't know how strong the tea is until you put it into hot water. So because leading up to cancer, I was already meditating. I was, you know, I had a yoga practice. I mean, I was still deeply flawed. I still had a lot of issues, but I was searching for answers, and I was very sincere and earnest about it. And it was actually a big chunk of my life. I mean, I would sometimes at one point I dropped out of so-called society and went up to Dharamshala in the mountains for a 6-month retreat, where I just meditated. I would go in for 10 days and I would come out and I'd go in for 10 days. And I felt very drawn to do that. I was compelled, something inside me was drawing me. Nobody was telling me to do this. And it was a very important time. So I did this before I was diagnosed with cancer.
Okay.
And the strangest thing is, I'll tell you one of the interesting things. There's a part of me that also, fortunately, has a very deep, abiding trust in the universe and in life, whatever you want to call it, God, source, universe, life, that God has my back. So that when I'm going through something, I'm able to frame it in like, what is this lesson? What do I have to learn from this? As opposed to just completely spiraling into panic and distress and why me and all of that. But that's as a result of all of the practices that I've done. And at the same time, you do these practices, and I know that you're a meditator as well, so maybe you can relate. You go away. And yes, the practices are not easy. It's not easy to sit for 10 days in silence. But at the same time, you're doing that. You're away from the world. You're away from your everyday life. Somebody's giving you a meal. Somebody's, right? You're away from all of the normal responsibilities that we have. But it's wonderful. Yet, when you come back into life, that's where you really have to practice.
Yeah.
Because you might think that I've advanced this much, I feel so much more peaceful, or I feel I can handle this. But one thing, your kid says something to you, or your best friend says something to you,
and
or somebody pisses you off, and you're like, rah! Like the Mara, the demon comes out, and that's where you check in with yourself. I know you can relate to this. Absolutely. That's where you check in, and you're like, hang on a second, maybe I have to do another retreat. I haven't not stabilized that. So I want to share one very quick example with you, though, that led up to my cancer. So about 8 months before I was diagnosed, my mom actually passed, and I took my father up to Dharamshala because I wanted him to experience the same kind of peace and perspective that I had experienced. So I checked him into this retreat, which is called Tushita. It's an introduction to Tibetan Buddhism. So my father was
that's the poem I read. That is from Tushita, right?
Yes, it's from Tushita. It's from my experiences. Yes. The 6 months at Tushita.
Yes.
But this is after that. And so while, my father was doing his retreat, I said, I'm going to take whatever retreat is going on at the same time, but I'm an experienced retreater. So guess what? It turned out to be a retreat on death and dying.
Oh my God. What are the chances?
What are the chances? I didn't even at that point even have an inkling. But I went into this retreat because I also was curious, because I also understood that I think that the Tibetan Buddhist way, I'm more familiar with the Tibetan Buddhist way, but the Tibetan Buddhist way of framing death is very healthy. They talk about it, they rehearse it, they bring it out into the open. It's a very healthy way because it's the one known, it's the one great...
the only truth, really.
It's the one great truth in our life, that at some point we have to confront that. Yeah. So I went into this retreat, and believe it or not, we sat down at maybe on day 5, and the Buddhist nun who was conducting the retreat, she said, okay, here's a visualization. Close your eyes and imagine that you're sitting in your doctor's office. And your doctor walks in and tells you have a very serious condition and you have 6 months to live. God.
Right.
And then you visualize, well, what am I going to do with these last 6 months? And at the end of it, everyone opens their eyes, and I look around the room, and I was expecting to see people looking very distressed or maybe a few tears. Everybody had the greatest smile on their face. Because the other thing about meditating on death is that it helps you live much more in the moment.
Actually,
because what we did is we imagined, if I have 6 months to live, I'm only going to do things that really matter to me. So everyone was imagining, whatever it is, moving to Bali or, jumping out of a plane, whatever it is, and so everyone was actually so happy. But can you imagine, I did this visualization about 8 months before I was diagnosed. So it gave me, in a strange way, the tools. And those tools were consolidated when I went through cancer. Now, there's no doubt that going through something like that changes everything for you. But I'm very grateful, as I said, that I had these incredible practices to, see me through it.
Right. My God, I can only imagine, because that is basically what the Stoic philosophy is also based on, that you imagine yourself through the worst phases of your life, like losing a loved one or being on the deathbed yourself. And that's one exercise I have done myself. So
Oh,
I know
wow.
how I want to die. I've visualized it. Like earlier, I wanted to die in my sleep when I wasn't spiritual in that sense. But now, no way. I want to be in my senses. I want to be conscious. I want to have the
Yeah.
brain as active as it is today. And that's what I'm working towards. So hopefully one should
Oh,
reach it
wow.
someday. Yeah.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
amazing.
Now we've spoken a lot about serious business of life. Let's come to a little bit of lighter.
Chalo, come on, let's do it.
You have mentioned WTF moments in your book. So would you like to share one WTF moment which you want to just share with the viewers right now?
Oh my
And
God.
this could be obviously when you were modeling or when you were acting, or it could be anything.
There's so many, but I think the one that I think that a lot of people find interesting is the time when I auditioned for one of the Bond films. And it was funny because I really embrace my failures today, but I really choked on that audition. And I choked with Daniel Craig there. And the reason I choked...
It would be so difficult, right?
And imagine, I've gone through, I've been selected out of, I don't know how many, and it's down to the last 3. So you have a 1 in 3 chance of getting this role. I never, again, surreal, talk about surreal. I never, ever dreamt. I never also aspired to be there, but it was cool, obviously, to be there.
Yeah.
But I still remember, and I did great auditions leading up to the screen audition with Daniel, and they flew me into the Pinewood studio and put me up, and it was like a Bond operation, actually. Everything was very covert, and and you go through this door and somebody escorts you here, and it was very weird. So there I was, and I was all set, but 2 things happened. First of all, I was supposed to play a South American character, and too many people had tried to teach me the South American accent. Right. So I started choking, like I just didn't know. I started strangling. I think I wrote that I sounded like some Scottish person who got into a bar fight finally. Like it was a really, my accent went wrong. And the director, poor chap, was actually rooting for me. So he says, okay, stop, let's reset, let's go again. But the biggest thing that I feel, and I don't know, Daniel Craig, you'll have to tell me one day if this was really the thing that definitely tipped it against me. As I sat there, I was so nervous. That instead of sort of being gracious, because he's a very gracious man, but he's really had this aura. He was dressed like Bond. He had this aura. He walked in, he was backlit, It was like, what is going on? Is I looked at him, and I got a little mesmerized by those blue eyes.
Beautiful.
And then I looked down, and I saw his shoes, and he had very shiny shoes. So I said, who shined your shoes? You have very shiny shoes. Can you tell me about the brand of those shoes? I started talking about his shoes, God help me, like a blithering idiot, And I would not also, like, there was one part of me, when you sort of split in half, one part of me is like, shut up. And another part of me just can't stop. I'm going on about these shoes. And he's looking at me, and when you can feel that you're just losing someone, like I was like, bye-bye, Daniel, bye-bye, role, bye-bye, that's not happening for you in this lifetime. Because I just wouldn't stop. I was just such a blithering idiot, So that was one of those WTF moments for sure.
I'm sure there must be so many more, but coming to the book, let's speak about the book a little bit, and then we can, perhaps say goodbye. I would love to chat with you for many hours, of course, but we have limited time, which I understand.
I know, and I appreciate this so much, Aditi. I know. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Thank you. So I'm very proud of the book. Again, as I said, I'm a bit of a late bloomer, but I feel I have found my main purpose. Close to the Bone is, I don't even like to call it a memoir. I call it a travelogue of the soul. And from what feedback I'm getting, I'm first of all very gratified to everyone who's read the book, who's supported the book. Writing is still, I think, very important. Sharing our stories is very important, and I still stand behind the written word. I think it might be something to do with the Bengali blood as well, though I know that Maharashtrians are also very strong and bibliophiles and have your own literary kind of tradition,
very strong.
and we need to feed it and keep it alive. But I absolutely poured completely my heart and my soul into the book, and I saw it as not just a memoir, not just sort of a one-off thing like some celebrity memoir. I saw it as my debut, my writing debut. And that's why I'm really happy, to share that I'm working on my next book right now.
Yes.
And still trying, it's sort of like how I feel even when I get in front of the camera. Every time I'm like, do I remember how to do this? I don't know. What am I doing? It's sort of the same thing.
Yeah.
Writing my second book, but in between I'm also doing a lot of other opinion pieces. I actually just wrote something for Kindle. They're having a special launch, and I just love it. I just writing is it's hard. It's very hard for me. I do procrastinate a lot. If you want to find out what kind of a procrastinator you are, try writing a book, because I'll be sitting there and I'll be like, I'll write one line and I'm like, oh, tea, I need tea, and I'll go off and I'll make tea, and I'll come back and I have to do something for the laundry or something. Yeah. But I love it. I know it's my calling, so I'm very happy for everyone's support, and I'm very blessed, and I'm very full of gratitude for everything that's coming in, for every opportunity.
Your writing. You write beautifully, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Aditi. Thank you.
Compliment. Now, writing a book also gets you to become very vulnerable to the world, because you literally become naked with your emotions.
Yeah.
How do you cope up with that?
I think that also part of my personal growth has fortunately put me in a place where it's very hard for me now to do the other thing, which is hide, which is suppress. I think I've worked so hard on opening myself that I can't suppress anymore. Like all the channels are wide open, and I really own my vulnerability. And I'm living from a place that my vulnerability is my strength. Yeah. So writing for me is a channel from which I can actually share my vulnerability. And it's not hard for me. It's very hard for me to do the other thing. It's very hard for me to put on a mask and, say things that I don't mean and, be fake in any way. I can't do it. So from that point of view, but at the same time, writing is also a bit of a relief. Obviously, it's not as direct. It's not like sitting in front of someone and telling them your tale from your heart. But at the same time, so there's a little bit of distance, but at the same time, it's my form of expression. And it's the one that I really own and that flows and comes very naturally to me right now. So it wasn't hard to be to share, my heart.
You didn't go through that moment of, oh my God, I'm sharing so much of me with everybody else. You were okay with sharing that? I
didn't when I was writing it, because you don't think about it. Again, it's sort of a flow. I think I thought about it for a moment, maybe just before the book was released, because I honestly didn't know how it would be handled. And to be honest, maybe if my book had released 10 years before in India, it might have been received in a very different way. I didn't want anything to be sensationalized. Not that I didn't sensationalize anything. I just spoke my truth. I guess the only other thing is that, of course, I've wanted to protect some people's identity, because it's, and so there were a few places where I didn't use names or I changed the names. And otherwise, where it comes to me, I've been completely honest. But, it's not fair vis-a-vis perhaps some other people for me to bring them into it.
Super. So, Lisa, thank you so much for joining me on Dr. A Talks. Is there one last message that you want to share with our viewers?
I just wanted to say that, we're going through a very strange season. We're living through a very strange season. And it's natural, of course, to feel, sometimes maybe positive, sometimes not so positive. And I would invite everyone to, to try to still express gratitude for what you have. It's a very, very powerful medicine for your mood. It's a great mood medicine, I like to call it. And at the same time, to understand that this too will pass, that everything changes, and that perhaps this is a sort of a hidden gift. We can't understand it now. And I don't want to, I don't want to underplay all the, the suffering and the difficulties that people have gone through. But, we've always gone through sufferings and difficulty, and maybe we can use this opportunity to better ourselves. And if each individual betters themselves in one way, that will have a ripple effect.
Oh my God, that will have a huge impact on the world that we are living in, isn't it? So absolutely rightly said, Lisa, it is a gift, but make use of it. If
Exactly.
we've been given this gift, if you keep it wrapped in a corner, it's of no use. So go ahead and use that gift and better yourself even a tiny bit every day. That will change you to, oh my God, a different person altogether. You'll see it in a few months' time that you've improved so much.
Exactly.
That's a great message from Lisa. So Lisa, thank you very much. Love to your kids in regards to yours.
I'm so happy to do this and to see you. Love you. Bye.
God bless.
Bye.